I'd like you to summarize your background for us, please, just in your own words.
Yes, sir, I hope I can. I was born in Zaire, in Katanga, in 1947. I was born in the mission, in a little village called Sampwe. My mother was a nurse at that place.
Yes, your mother. Now, what was her name?
Marie Caballo.
Your father?
I never knew my father, sir. He was divorced with my mother before I was born, but he was a white man and not of my mother's race.
What languages did you speak as a child?
I spoke the dialect of my mother's tribe and also French.
Would you feel happier giving your evidence in French now, Mr. Lapointe?
No, it is all right. I speak English pretty good. My mother was anxious for me to speak English, so she got a missionary at Sampwe, Mr. Van Helm, to teach me.
Why was she so anxious for you to speak English?
Because she told me my father was an Englishman and that one day I would have the chance to meet him.
Did she ever tell you his name?
Oh, yes. From when I was a little boy, she told me his name was Tom Crittenden. She also gave me 2 certificates. One certificate to say she was married with Tom Crittenden, and the other certificate to say I was born with him for my father.
Are those the certificates which you presented to Mr. Bowers, the solicitor, when you came to England last December?
That's so, sir, yes.
And are they the certificates which have been introduced in evidence in court today?
No, sir, I'm not so sure about that.
I beg your pardon.
I think the marriage certificate I showed to Mr. Bowers is the one, all right, but the other one, no.
Yes, well, we shall return to that in due course. Did your mother ever tell you that your father knew of your existence?
I'm sorry, sir.
You've explained that your mother and father were divorced before you were born, but did she ever say to you that he knew there had been a child of their marriage?
Oh, yes. She told me he had given her money so that I could be brought up right. He was most particular that I should not be without anything I truly needed.
Did your mother then speak of the divorce ever? How it happened? Why?
No, not much. I think it was pretty sad for her. When I was older, I asked her many times, and she told me finally it was because some people came from my father's country and were deeply shocked at the marriage. And they said it had to be ended. But my father really didn't want it that way. And these people, they talked and talked to him until finally he gave in. He cried when he told my mother the marriage had to be ended and that he had to leave her.
Yes, I see. Mr. Lapointe, how did your mother die? When was it?
I was 16 at the time. Mr. Van Helm was still teaching me, and then there was trouble fighting.
The Katangan riots?
Yes. It was something to do with the tribes and a new government in Leopoldville. But I did not know much about this because I was small. But my mother and I were living in the mission, and for the tribes, this meant we were the same as Belgians. They came just one night. There was no warning. I was asleep on the veranda of my mother's hut. And then I heard noises from inside, screaming. My mother was screaming for me to run away. It was terrible. Everything was on fire, the houses, the hospital. I could not find Mr. Van Helm or anyone. And then they started to come for me. So I just had to run for my life into the bush. And I stayed there the whole night, and the next day too. While the killing and the screaming and the burning went on. And then, when it was quiet, I went back, and my mother was dead. Murdered. It seemed like everyone was dead. There was nothing, nobody, only the dead.
So what did you do?
I did not know what to do. I had no family, no money. So eventually I went to Leopoldville, Kinshasa they call it now. And I worked there for 7 years, saving my money and learning to speak English better so that one day I could see my father in England.
And in the event, that's what you did, is it?
Yes, sir. It took a long time. My wages were not so good. But last November I had enough money to come to London, so I came. And then when I get here, I find my father had died. There were things in the papers. He was an important man. They made him a sir.
Knighted him, yes.
And then I went to see the lawyers the papers talked about, Mr. Bowers, and I told him who I was, and I showed him the certificate to prove it.
And as we know, Mr. Bowers submitted the certificates to the Zaire authorities, who pronounced them genuine.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Lapointe, did you then ask Mr. Bowers for money?
Oh, yes, I did.
Why was that, please?
I was the son of Sir Tom Crittenden. I had some right to some of the money. I was poor. It is difficult to get work in England. So I asked Mr. Bowers for some money to live on, and then I asked him for some money to get a place to stay.
During these various negotiations with Mr. Bowers, had you met with Lady Dorothy Crittenden and with her children Bernard and Kate?
Yes, I met them. I met Lady Dorothy twice. The first time was at Mr. Bowers' office, and she came with her children, Bernard and Kate. I think she was shocked to see me.
Shocked?
Yes. She would not speak to me direct, only through Mr. Bowers. She would not listen, she only talked. Bernard was the same. Only Kate wanted to listen to what I had to say. I think she even liked me a little bit.
And the second time, Mr. Lapointe?
That was at Lady Dorothy's house. That was very strange. She told me there had been areas of doubt and that I was to have some money for the time being. But she still was not very friendly, you know. She would not talk to me. She kept looking out of the window, you know.
Lady Dorothy has testified that on the occasion of that second visit, she overheard a conversation between you and her daughter in which you said, "That was easy. That was just too easy. If the rest of it is half as easy, I'll make out I'm twins." Whoever put it around honesty was the best policy.
No, I never said those things, sir.
Are you quite sure that you didn't, Mr. Lapointe?
Oh, I made some joke to Kate about what if I were twins, yes. And I also said talking to her mother had been a lot easier than I thought, but I never said those things about honesty and such the like, no.
You're suggesting then that Lady Dorothy's memory of that conversation may be a little at fault?
Or else she's telling lies.
Oh, come, that's a little bit strong, isn't it?
Well, I don't know, sir. There are strange things about Lady Dorothy and Bernard. This birth certificate, my birth certificate is supposed to be, that we saw a while ago, the blow-up. I say that that is not the certificate I showed to Mr. Bowers and had all my life.
It isn't the certificate?
No, sir.
How can you be so sure of that?
Well, after my Christian name's Raoul Edouard, the name Lapointe was put on the certificate afterwards by my mother. Only when she was writing the name Lapointe, she made a mistake and she spilled some ink on the paper. So where is the sign there that she rubbed out the mess and wrote the name again? Even though it looks like my mother's handwriting, I know that was never my certificate.
Are you saying, then, that this forged document was substituted for the one which you presented to Mr. Bowers?
Yes, sir. I mean, the first time my certificate was investigated, the Zaire legation found it genuine. Well, I should think these people should know. The second time, Bernard does it, and it comes back a fraud.
Let me be quite clear about this, Mr. Lapointe. You are maintaining that the birth certificate entered in evidence here is not the one that you entrusted to Mr. Bowers, and in fact that a substitution would seem to have been made while that document was in the possession of Bernard Crittenden.
Yes, my lord, that is correct.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lapointe. I have no further questions.
Well, really, Mr. Lapointe, one hardly knows where to begin with you. Not only in your submission has Lady Dorothy Crittenden lied under oath, but now you say that Bernard Crittenden is a forger and a trickster.
That birth certificate is not the one I showed to Mr. Bowers, madam, I know it.
Well, naturally, you'd have to say something like that now that it's been proved a forgery.
No, madam.
Well, let's just stick to the things we can substantiate, shall we? Now, there's only one real issue in this case, and that is whether you actually are, or sincerely believed yourself to be, the true son of Sir Tom Crittenden. Now, you do realize, don't you, that however many documents you can present to us here today, that doesn't prove that you are his son. However, curiously enough, the production of a forged document does rather suggest that you are not. For it suggests an intention of deceit.
I didn't forge any birth certificate, I didn't.
Bernard Crittenden did, however?
Well, I can't be sure of that.
Mr. Lapointe, you say that your mother told you your father insisted you should bear the name Lapointe rather than his own name.
Yes.
Now, isn't this a rather strange condition for a man to make who, if we can believe all we're told, was anxious at all times to recognize you as his legitimate son?
Well, it was forced on him, maybe, by the people that disagreed with the marriage. Lapointe is the family name of Sir Tom. How would I even have that if it was not given by him?
Oh, come, Mr. Lapointe, you do yourself an injustice. That wouldn't be a difficult piece of information for a for an ambitious young fortune hunter like yourself to ferret out, would it?
You've got no right to talk to me like that.
Well, we've only got your word for it that the name Lapointe on the certificate was ever in your mother's hand. It could well have been in your own assumed hand, like the rest of the writing.
No, it's lies, all lies.
Is it, Mr. Lapointe, is it really? Well, then you'll just have to tell us something we find a little easier to believe, won't you? Do you realize you said nothing, not one single word, that would convince any rational person that you are indeed the son of Sir Tom Crittenden, industrialist, respected Britisher, millionaire?
All right, all right. You will please listen to me. My father ran away from this country when he was 13 years old. He ran away because he wanted to raise horses, but his father wouldn't let him. He was only found again because he fell from a train and got a bad injury to his leg. He carried that scar for the rest of his life. That was 4 centimeters long and was just below the right knee. He also had a birthmark on his right shoulder blade. The saddest thing that ever happened to my father when he was a boy was a pet goat dying. The name of that goat was Caddy. You want more, madame, or is that enough for now? How would I know these things if they were not told to me by my mother, Marie Caballo? I am Raoul Edward Lapointe, son of Sir Tom.
This was sent to you by Mr. Wilfrid Bowers, and which you scrutinized at your legation office.
Very difficult to say, I'm afraid.
Yes, it's also extremely important. This certificate has been branded a forgery, yet you pronounced the one that was sent to you to be genuine, didn't you?
I'm certain the one sent to me was genuine.
Why so certain, Mr. Umbula?
Because it was very hard making a judgment about it. I consulted my assistants and we examined it separately. Yet in the end we came to the conclusion that it was right.
Then can the birth certificate, which you have there in your hand, actually be the one that was sent to you?
No, I think not. The one we saw was genuine.
Thank you. Now, you say it was very hard making a judgment about that certificate. Why was it so hard, Mr. Umbula?
You must remember that until very recently, we never had the kind of comprehensive system in Africa that you enjoy in Europe. The old Congo, in fact, is not too much to say, was by guess and by God. In the country areas, we almost entirely depended on the missions and the records they kept. But then, ironically enough, it was the missions that were destroyed in the riots before independence.
Yes, quite. Now, before he left Kinshasa for London, Raoul Lapointe was issued with a passport, was he not?
Yes, obviously.
Well, that would mean, then, that the local authorities in Kinshasa must have been entirely satisfied with his birth certificate.
Of course.
And you and your authorities in London were perfectly satisfied with it there. Thank you.
Mr. Umbula, when you received the birth certificate from Mr. Bowers, you immediately suspected that it might be a forgery, did you, and submitted it to the appropriate tests?
I beg your pardon.
Well, I say that you took into consideration the fact that it might well be a forgery, and consequently tested it for age, authenticity, type of paper used, etc.
No, we didn't do any tests like that.
Really? Well, what sort of tests did you do then?
We just wanted to make sure it was the kind of document that could have come out of the area somewhere at the time it's said. We made some comparisons as far as we could. Eventually we got a hold of some writings by the missionary Van Helm. The handwriting seemed the same.
Naturally. No one's suggesting it's anything less than a clever forgery. Now, were there any distinguishing marks on it that you recall, Mr. Umbula?
Distinguishing marks?
Anything unusual, anything you remember. Mistakes in the writing, sign of erasures, perhaps.
No, I don't remember anything like that.
Nothing at all?
Nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Umbula.
May this witness be released, my lord?
Certainly may leave now, if you so wish, Mr. Umbula.
This, my lord, I call Miss Kate Crittenden, of the late Sir Tom.
I am.
And is your permanent address the same as your mother's?
It is.
What is your occupation, please?
I'm a student at Cambridge.
I should like you to tell the court, if you would, Miss Crittenden, whether or not you know the accused, Raoul Lapointe, and if so, what precisely is your connection with him?
Oh, yes, I know Raoul all right. And my connection with him is a blood connection. He's my half-brother.
You say that with great conviction, Miss Crittenden.
Why shouldn't I?
Well, it's been suggested in court that Raoul Lapointe is not what he says he is, the son of Marie Caballo and Tom Crittenden.
Oh, yes. That would be the business of the birth certificate, no doubt, which my brother Bernard had analysed and gleefully pronounced a forgery. But I'm not concerned in things like that. It never occurred to me, in fact, that Raoul's case could stand or fall on a piece of paper. My mother and Bernard simply didn't want a black man as a relative. It was as uncomplicated as that. They found the whole idea of Raoul inconvenient. Therefore, they worked consciously and deliberately to discredit him.
What convinces you of that, Miss Crittenden?
Well, one night after my mother had told Raoul she didn't mean to oppose him any longer, I was in the library of our house looking for a book. Bernard and my mother came and they were in mid-conversation, unaware I was there. And Bernard said to my mother, well, I've asked for his certificates again. That's the first step. And my mother answered, are you sure we're acting in the right way? Will it succeed? And Bernard said, I know what I'm doing. By the time I've finished with Raoul of Pointe now, he won't have a leg to stand on. Well, then there were some remarks I couldn't quite hear. But eventually my mother said, well, what about the money? Was I wise in letting him have it? And Bernard said, it's better. It means we'll get him on a charge in the end.
Thank you, Miss Crittenden.
Miss Crittenden, you suggested from the very beginning that your mother and your brother Bernard were distressed by the idea of having to accept a colored man as a member of the family.
Yes, I'm convinced that's true.
And you, on the other hand, were overjoyed by the prospect, weren't you?
I'm sorry, I don't follow that.
Well, it's very simple. I'm simply drawing attention to the difference in ideology between you and...
ideology doesn't come into this, you know.